Well, when I look at the way people save or accumulate assets, the words diversification and asset allocation have a connotation of inside of a portfolio, inside of your investment portfolio or this one account. How are you diversified or how are you allocated?
Right. If you're in a bunch of mutual funds, you're not very diversified. It's all stocks and maybe some bonds.
So I think of it more macro, and I call it the art of asset allocation, and it's an acronym.
Is that the name of your second book?
Maybe, who knows? But it's an acronym, and the first one is access. Do you have access to assets at any time? So it's okay. I'm not saying a 401k is bad. But if it's tied up till 59.5 and you have opportunities or emergencies along the way, you can't really access it without a big penalty. And those penalties kind of negate all of the upside. So access is a big one. Do you have different buckets of money where you can touch them whenever? So if you have one you can tap whenever, then it's okay to tie some of that up. The second one is risk. Do you have an asset that always goes up in value? The only question is how fast. If you have that asset, you can then weather the storms and weather the risks. And when 2008 happens, or when the early 2000s happen, or when the next crash does happen, it will come. When that comes, you're not taking your minus 30% loss and turning it into a minus 40 or 50 because you took additional funds out of there.
And depleting that and starting to accelerate that.
You make it impossible to
disinvestment,
catch up. You make it impossible to catch up. So I think that's the risk one. And the other one is tax. We don't know where tax rates will be. Right now, tax rates are legislated just in 2 years or a year and a half to go up to rates that they were, prior to 2018. Congress has the 100% power to change that and make that whatever they want. And if you look through historical tax rates, they've been massively higher. So if at some point the political will decides that, well, these people are too rich, and they decide what that level is, and it's probably less than you're thinking, they can tax you at whatever rate they want. So if you have these accounts, you're in debt to the IRS. You've deferred taxation on these dollars, and you will repay that debt to the IRS somewhere down the road, and you don't know the rate at which you're paying. So again, diversification and tax deferral is not a bad thing, but if you force yourself into a situation to liquidate those assets at someone else's predetermined rate, it probably makes more sense to have a vehicle in your portfolio where you can manage that. And maybe only take half as much because that's a tough tax year or whatever.
Yeah, when I wrote Killing Sacred Cows, I pointed out 15 issues with 401ks. And 401k is synonymous with traditional IRA or SEP IRA or any of that kind of stuff. But it was, one, we don't know what the tax rates are going to be in the future, so you're deferring into an unknown future. Two, limited to no cash flow because it's all based upon accumulation. And you have to take a 72T distribution to probably get cash flow before 59.5, which is really restrictive and not necessarily the best idea for most people. Three, FBO is the thing that bothered me for benefit of.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, cool. So this is my account or is it the government's tax code for my benefit? And how easy is it for them to make that change?
Yeah.
Right. Then I was like, it's typically overly, it's not diversified. It's usually just a bunch of stocks inside of a mutual fund, inside of whatever brokerage that people are getting.
Right.
They're putting money in whether they're making money or not. So they're getting into dollar cost averaging, which makes them average instead of thinking more strategically. I mean, there was just point after point. But my biggest issue was what happens when you finally get to the point where you're supposed to start utilizing this money? If you hated paying taxes before, you're going to hate paying them just as much. So that's a problem because it was delayed. If you take more than interest in any given year, you risk depleting the account and what's your backstop on that. And if you want to live the same lifestyle, you have to start taking more money because inflation is going to start eating away at that. And if you're one-dimensional, where you just have a house and the house isn't providing cash flow, that's a problem. So having a portfolio where you have permission to spend using the title of your book to say, well, even if you do take principal and interest, what are your backstops? What are some things that you could do by having this other asset allocation that opens up possibility?
Yeah. So the research that I did, was actually saying, okay, this buffer strategy, this volatility buffer strategy, how can we stay invested in retirement, actually have these investments work for us as opposed to several years before retirement, taking all the risk off the table and turning it into cash and thereby negating any upside going forward. How do we manage that? So it actually looked at, what if we had a buffer asset? So over like 30-year periods of time, which is what that original study was, that's where that 4% rule came from, over rolling 30-year periods of time. What did it actually do to safe withdrawal rates if we could take a year off? And that money can come from anywhere. It can come from your rich Uncle Steve. It can come from money buried in the backyard. I don't care where it comes from. Whole life, all these things. Home equity actually is a good one. If you can take a year off in a down market, so when 2022 happens and everything's down, if you can take that year off and pull money from somewhere else that's guaranteed to go up, what does that do to your safe withdrawal rate and the rest of your assets? And long story short, it came down to basically for every year of income you have that you can take from somewhere else, you can increase your safe withdrawal rate by about 0.5% or roughly 10%. So if you're taking 5% off of your portfolio, 5.5 is your new safe withdrawal rate. If you have 1 year, you can pull from somewhere else. If you have 3 years, now it's 6.5. Now we're actually starting to impact lifestyle. We're actually changing someone's lifestyle. And it's simply just
on $1 million, we're talking about $15,000 a year.
Yeah.
More after 3 years.
And the key is it's not more money. It's not that, I have more money somewhere else. It's literally
just a volatility buffer.
It's an asset shift. So in my example, if you have a 100% portfolio, but we turn it into an 85% portfolio, and that 15% is now living somewhere else on our balance sheet that can't go down, it's accessible, and it's not correlated to the markets, that will increase the safe withdrawal rate off that 85% that's still invested. And that's the strategy. It's not more complicated than that. People try to overthink this stuff. You had mentioned in one of our previous recordings that you suggest, or you personally put a certain percentage of your income into cash value participating whole life insurance.
Yep.
I do too. And early on in my career, I remember one of my early mentors said, I tell all my clients to put 5 to 10% of their income into whole life. And that was probably a good idea, but I never understood why. Like, why that number? Why not 7%? Why not 12? And I wanted to get at where that came from. And I think about it differently. I actually think about if we are doing some, projections of our accounts going forward, what percentage of my overall portfolio, my overall human allocation toward financial vehicles do I have in a non-correlated, guaranteed to go up in value asset like whole life insurance, which is my preferred. And I think if you're targeting, 15 to 20%, that's probably 3 to 4 years you can take off from a major market downturn, and we've never seen more than that historically. So that's probably a good place to start. And you can just do some backwards math on how much of a contribution you need to make to get there. And if you're more conservative, or you're more charitably inclined, or you've done well and you will be passing significant wealth to the next generation, it can be a much higher number.
Right. I mean, what it opens up when you have a death benefit, because even if you had just 3 assets instead of 2, so instead of just a retirement plan and a home, you had a retirement plan, cash value with a death benefit and a home. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, if you started spending more of that retirement plan, and then you live an extra 10 years, 15 years, you could always take a reverse mortgage on the home because you have this death benefit that could replenish that.
Exactly. You just won the lottery.
Right.
But guess what? You don't actually get paid out for 20 years. In 20 years' time, we're going to drop a $10 million check in your family's lap.
You can live a different 20 years because you know that money's coming in.
That's the key. It's not necessarily that it makes you more wealthy to have this, but that allocation makes you free to spend. You don't lose the sleep at night. You know that the backstop is in place.
There's an effect to that.
And that's what retirement plans today for most Americans don't have. All they have is an accumulation strategy. There's no decumulation strategy.
So what's your backstop? How do you prevent disinvesting, where you start watching those accounts deplete and become problematic because of volatility? Where can you have an income smoothing process, a volatility buffer? Where can you make a different asset allocation decision? Maybe instead of just having money in bonds as part of that diversified portfolio, it's cash value. You still have the other part of your portfolio, but now you have a death benefit that comes along with it and a guaranteed amount every time dividends are paid. And, you did studies in 30-year periods. Cash value always outperform bonds. In 10-year periods, bonds always outperform cash value because of the cost up front. So it depends on how long-term you're looking, but start thinking about taking care of yourself and giving you the gift of having volatility buffers, of giving you the gift of being able to handle market fluctuations and economies you don't control, and interest rate fluctuations and tax fluctuations and inflation coming in. Having the ability to spend more money makes a huge difference. Having the ability to access money along the way, it makes a huge difference. Having money that's safe from the market so that when the market's down, you can capitalize on opportunities makes all the difference.